Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Jeffrey Epstein surrounded himself with not only professors, but scientists as well. He had a grab bag full of high-profile physicists, geneticists, you name it, at his beck and call. All because he was willing to pony over the dough to finance their projects. Now, how many of these scientists got caught up in the blackmail scheme? How many of them had dossiers compiled on them for their behavior while at the island or elsewhere? And in turn, how many of these scientists had to pony over classified information to Jeffrey Epstein and his handlers? Now, Zorro Ranch was strategically placed basically right between Los Alamos and the Santa Fe Institute. Jeffrey Epstein had ties to both places. We know his ties to the Santa Fe Institute were very, very, very deep. And at Los Alamos as well, he had ties to the scientists that were working there. So Jeffrey Epstein, not only was Zorro Ranch placed in Stanley, right outside of Santa Fe for the privacy, which is rather obvious. If you ever get down there, you'll see what I'm talking about. It is insanely desolate, right? But also for the location, to be in close proximity to the Santa Fe Institute and Los Alamos. I think that is a thread that needs to be pulled on. I don't think there's been anywhere near enough digging into Jeffrey Epstein and his relationship with scientists who were working on confidential projects for the government or elsewise. How many of these projects ended up in the hands of whoever? If we're going off of the premise that this was a blackmail operation being run by intelligence, well, we know that to them the most important thing is information. So what were they doing with this information? Why was it so crucial for scientists to be brought into the fold? And when you start putting the pieces together, well, it starts to look like whoever was in charge of running Epstein and Maxwell, it looks like they wanted access to this information as well. And it would make sense, right? If Jeffrey Epstein has all of these scientists around him, all of these people working on various projects, you would think that whoever is handling Epstein and Maxwell definitely would want to get their fingers and their hands all over that information. So, along with this being a blackmail operation, I think that there was also some secrets getting moved to whoever was in charge of running this thing at the very top. And, we can all speculate about who it was, who was in charge of the operation. You have a lot of people that want to say it's the Mossad, and I believe that the Mossad did play their role. But for my money, when you look at all of the pieces and you see all of the gears that are moving and you see all of the pistons that are pumping, the only group that is able to pull something like this off for so long, so seamlessly, is the CIA. And I would need to see hard evidence that the CIA is not involved in this, because no matter where you go around the world, no matter what situation you find yourself looking at the CIA in, it always turns out to be an epic shit show. There's a reason that JFK wanted to scatter the CIA to the four corners of the earth. It is a completely corrupted, rotted, gross organization that has overstepped their charter time and time again, and they must be reined in. But yet, they continue to operate freely. Their friends that used to be agents populate your legacy media outlets, and the gaslighting continues. Meanwhile, people who are starting to take a look behind the curtain understand that something is very, very wrong. This article that we're going to read today is from evolutionnews.org, and it was first published in September of 2019. And I archived this article a few months ago when I read it because I thought it would be a good add to the catalog at some point. And considering we really don't have any new news to add this morning, I figured we'd jump on in and we'd add this to the catalog and see what Mr. Michael Egnor has to say. So the author of this article is Michael Egnor, and the headline, Jeffrey Epstein and the Silence of the Scientists. The headline really tells the whole tale, right? Because even the people that were in the black book, when they were approached or questioned, the few that were, oh, I didn't really know that guy. What are you, crazy? Everybody distanced themselves from it, and nobody dug deeper. None of these legacy media outlets had the wherewithal to go any deeper. Literary scholars have an adage about interpretation of texts. They point out that the really important things in a text are often what is not said, more so than what is said. To really understand a story, you have to read between the lines. And what do we always talk about here on this podcast, right? Just read between the lines. That's all we're doing here. That's all we are doing here. We're trying to put the pieces together. And really, it all comes back to one question and one question that has not been answered, right? And that question is, why has there not been a real investigation into this case? Why has there not been a trial? Why have these people not have to answer for what they have done? And that's basically what started the whole quest here on this podcast, right? Those kind of questions. And still, they have not been answered. Again, all I'm calling for is a full investigation and a trial. I'm not somebody that's ever calling for people to be ripped out of their homes and thrown underneath prisons without their day in court. I think that the justice system is broke, and the two-tier justice system is such a stain on not only American society, but civilized society as a whole, that it's important that it's fixed, right? How can we have just societies when it's not equal justice under the law? And that's all I'm looking for here. These people have been acting above the law for way too long, and they need to be brought down to earth. None of these people, CIA, politicians, or princes, should be able to operate without the rule of law looking over their shoulder. What should be in the story but was left out? What was the motive for the omissions? This often reveals deep purposes and themes that are obscured in the explicit words on the page. Sherlock Holmes' dog that didn't bark. Silence is often the real meaning in a story. And that's the truth right there, right? It's what they don't say in these stories, or they'll just scratch the surface a little bit. Lies of omission are still lies. And we've seen the legacy media time and time again with their coverage of this story go that route. And now, of course, it's becoming a little bit different, right? They're starting to see the tide turn. They're starting to understand that the public is really fired up about this case, and they want some answers. So even the legacy media is trying to, jump on board and make it appear as if they care. But that ship has already sailed, and we already know the destination. The scientific scandal involving pedophile Jeffrey Epstein is horrifying, but it's vital that we understand the real meaning of the collaboration between Epstein and the science elites. And that's exactly what Jeffrey Epstein's collection of scientists was, right? A bunch of scientific elites. Those were the kind of people that Jeffrey Epstein brought into his atmosphere. Only the elites of society, the elites of their field, because they were the people that could further Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's goals. The most important meaning in that partnership between Epstein and leading Darwinists and computer scientists isn't the depravity of the man and his elite scientific friends. The most important meaning is in the silence in the scientific community in the midst of this atrocity. That's another thing I've been talking about, right? With the scientists and the professors and the academics as a whole. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a blight on all academics. I've had several fantastic professors reach out to me, Dr. Stephen DeLay for one, who is abhorred by this, who will never sit around and be silent in the face of such evil. But for the most part, the elites of these universities and the scientists that work at universities and elsewhere have been very, very silent when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. And they have been very, well, we didn't know him. Very deflective when it comes to their relationships with him. When it's known, obviously, that their ties were much deeper than just a guy showing up and dropping off money. That doesn't happen in the real world. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just showing up to give you money for nothing in return. It is, I believe, a revelation about our scientific culture, and in particular about the trust we should place in a science consensus that should shake us to our bones. It is what didn't happen in the Epstein story, even more than what did happen, that reveals the most. And especially right now, right? Where everybody's throwing around phrases such as, believe the scientists, believe the scientists, believe this one, believe... Which scientists? When you have two different realities being delivered to you, how do you know which one is real? The only way to discern which one is real, what is fake, is to get down in the weeds and to figure it out for yourself. What didn't happen? What didn't happen is this. There was no dissent in the scientific profession about taking guidance and money from a convicted pedophile who was obviously trafficking children for sex. Not a word. At every stage of this repellent saga, from Epstein's early forays into scientific patronage 20 years ago, through his conviction for child prostitution in 2008, to his largesse as a patron of elite Darwinists and computer scientists at MIT, Harvard, the Santa Fe Institute, the Transhumanist Project, Humanity Plus, and others, in the decade that followed there was from the scientific community abject silence. And that's why I've been so critical of the scientific community and why I think it's such an important part of the story that we have to keep harping on and we have to keep talking about. Because just because somebody is a scientist or smart or has a bunch of degrees or has a bunch of money does not make them trustworthy, does not make them somebody that we need to listen to. I don't know about you folks now, but for me personally, the very rare times that I watch the news, anytime they bring on a so-called specialist, I do research into who this specialist is. And more times than not, it's just another paid pundit. So we got to really safeguard what we're letting in to the vaults of our mind, right? We have to stand on guard at our mind and really, really be careful what gets in. Thousands of elite and pedestrian scientists benefited from Epstein's philanthropy and camaraderie. Thousands more knew of Epstein's courtship rituals, with scientists and with children, and said absolutely nothing. What happened on the Lolita Express in Pedophile Island, while probably known to many of Epstein's elite science pals, were known as well, at least in outline, to the thousands of ordinary scientists and administrators who cashed his checks and worked in his labs. This is a damning piece right here, folks, okay? This is a damning piece, and it is exposing the underbelly of the so-called smartest amongst us. Only whispered questions. There were whispered questions, undeniably. Obvious questions. There must have been daily whispers in labs and hallways and in coffee rooms. Why is Dr. So-and-so taking trips with this guy? What do you think is happening with all of those little girls? Where does the money come from? You know, the basic questions you would ask, you or I would ask and around the water cooler that the people who were accepting this money obviously thought they didn't have to ask. I just don't understand it. Like, if you're going to accept this kind of money from somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, you would vet him first, don't you think? Maybe run a basic Google search, take a look at what's going on, perhaps. So when they try and say they had no idea what Jeffrey Epstein was, what he was up to, it's such bullshit. We have so many different people who have come out and said everybody knew. Everybody knew. But we're supposed to believe that nobody knew. That's what they want us to believe. That's the official narrative, folks, okay? The answers were in broad daylight. Epstein's life was an open internet page. Thousands of scientists and administrators, even those not directly involved with Epstein and the children he trafficked, asked these questions and knew the answers. No one said a word. Why? Because money blinds all. When it comes down to the money, these people were getting big dough from Jeffrey Epstein. So why should they care about these girls? Why should they care about all the girls who were abused in Palm Beach or in New York, or all of the girls who were flown in from overseas? Nah, who cares? Take his money anyway. The means justifies the end. That's how these sick people think. A pariah for life. Some years ago, at a scientific conference, I had a private chat with a colleague from another university. His research was in a rather obscure topic in biology, but he was a scientist of the first rank. He was a superb investigator, and quite senior and widely respected. He told me that he knew that I was involved in intelligent design, and he thanked me for what I was doing. He told me that he was a Christian. He said a lot of the scientists know that Darwinism is a charade, and he was thankful for scientists who were speaking out, but he couldn't do so, although he desperately wanted to. He said his wife was sick and that if he spoke out, he would never get another grant. A single public statement endorsing ID or critiquing Darwinism in any meaningful way would make him a pariah for the rest of his life. So you can't believe in God or talk out against Darwinism, but you can accept money from Jeffrey Epstein. See, folks, my point is, dissenting opinions are okay. That's how we grow. That's how we learn what is right and what is wrong. We have to get out of the echo chamber. If you're not spending any time being uncomfortable, you're not doing it right. And these universities are in an echo chamber. There is no doubt about it. And they don't want to hear shit from the outside world. My career would end the day I spoke out, he told me. He said that his wife's life depended on her current medical care, and he would be unable to afford her care if he lost his position. He said he felt terrible that he couldn't speak out publicly, but he had a responsibility to his family, and they would suffer if his career went into the abyss. Scientists, especially scientists in academia, are uniquely vulnerable to professional destruction if they stray from the herd. That's for sure. You can't have dissenting opinions anymore in science or elsewhere. You know how the censorship game is played. That's their jam. They love to censor ideas and opinions and things that they don't agree with. So imagine being a scientist and you're talking about something that goes against what the rest of the scientific community might think or the people in your profession might think. I mean, we see it with archaeology all the time. Just look at what's going on in North America, where people are still stuck to, the whole entire idea that, people didn't come to North America for 10,000 years or 12,000 years, when evidence is being provided and found that says that that's not the case. But the scientific community remains just so rigid in the way they conduct themselves. It's just a microcosm of the so-called polite society that we always talk about. Just look at the The ostracism, ridicule, and even hate rained upon Mike Behe or Jonathan Wells or Guillermo Gonzalez or Bill Dembski or Rich Sternberger or any of the other courageous scientists who had the integrity to question the Darwinian consensus. As the Epstein scandal shows with striking clarity, dissent on matters of importance is forbidden in the scientific community. Scientists will engage in or tolerate all manner of lie and vice to protect their careers. They go along to get along. They join the consensus that Jeffrey Epstein is a wonderful patron and his money is untainted, just as they join the consensus that Darwinian evolution is a fact. Many, perhaps even most, do not do it because they believe it. They do it for professional survival. Well, I don't know about all of that, evolution and Darwinism. I'm not going to get into all of that nonsense because I'm not, a scientist or anything. But the point he's trying to make is if you go against the grain in the scientific community, you're looking at being ostracized and fed to the sharks. And if you were to come out against Jeffrey Epstein and speak out against what was going on with his money, you most certainly would have been ostracized if you're taking millions away from your colleagues. The profound revelation from the Epstein scandal is that the scientific community is silent in the face of obvious lies, criminality, and moral atrocities. Scientists at MIT and Harvard and the coterie of institutions of whom Epstein reigned largesse obviously knew enough about Epstein to know that association with him was immoral and his money probably came from child sex trafficking. They could know, with a mouse click, that Epstein had no college degree and sketchy experience in finance. His primary enterprise seemed to be making little girls available to rich men. But they stuck with the consensus and said nothing. Their scientific careers came first. And he's not wrong. He is not wrong about what he's saying here. A lot of these people put their careers first. Shut up. Keep it going. Don't say a word. Don't rock the boat. These aren't the kind of people that you want mad at you. And it's just, we've seen it over and over again in these kind of communities like the scientific community, the financial community. All of these people knew the deal. All of them. And none of them had the courage to speak up. Kept in the club, there was a scientific consensus held by thousands of scientists at all levels of the profession that Jeffrey Epstein was a great patron. Any doubts, and there must have been agonizing doubts for 20 years, were kept in the club. There is also a scientific consensus that nothing makes sense except in light of Darwinian evolution, held, as it turns out, by many of the same scientists who cashed Epstein's checks. There was, and is, no dissent. And in science, that's not good. An echo chamber in science is not good. Dissenting opinions should be looked at by the scientific community. The same steps that are run through the scientific process should be run on dissenting opinions as well. And I don't understand why other scientists would try and belittle and not look at things critically, unless, of course, they're looking to advance an agenda, whatever that may be. This is the lesson from the Epstein scandal. Scientists are first and foremost devoted to their own professional survival, and they will toe any line to survive. They will lie, cheat, and steal for professional security. They will even tacitly endorse child rape and child sex trafficking, and personally profit from it, to avoid the professional abyss. Science is conducted under a code of omerta. Dissent is punished mercilessly. As a measure of scientific and moral truth, scientific consensus is worthless. And look, I know that there will be people who take umbrage with the fact that this guy is talking about, Darwinism and evolution and stuff like that, but who cares about any of that? Leave that to the side. The point he's trying to make in the piece is that the scientific community and the most high-profile scientists around took Jeffrey Epstein's money willingly. They knew what was up, they knew what he was, and they knew exactly where this man had been. And yet it didn't matter. These scientists that run in these circles will be the same scientists that look down at you from their ivory towers and thumb up their noses. Meanwhile, they're busy breaking bread with a known pedophile. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. I'll be back later, folks. Enjoy your Monday.